Let's get salty!
Everyone, Zeddy here again today with a brand new video, and we are going to talk about one of the most controversial cards in Hearthstone, and a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about it. Before we get into that though, I am announcing the giveaway winners for $200 of Hearthstone packs. We fell just short of 57,000 subs, I think by like 25 as I'm recording this. It's 25. You guys are insane. I love you. I appreciate you. So we're gonna give away $300 worth of Hearthstone packs to these three winners. And again, thank you guys all for that support. I'm sure we'll get to 57K at some point. Don't worry, there'll be more giveaways coming in the near future, so stay tuned. We'll have plenty more opportunities to make me go broke. So what card am I talking about that's driving everyone crazy? Well, it's kind of in his name, and it was released in the Murder at Castle Nathria expansion that we are expecting the final like buffs to be announced probably tomorrow. Stay tuned for that. But that is Theotar the Mad Duke, a neutral legendary minion, 4-mana 3/3 battlecry. You discover a card in each player's hand and you swap them. So effectively, if your opponent's holding their Denathrius, you can just snatch it and give them back a coin or just some stupid little swarmer. And I have seen so many people hate on this card, say it's driving me crazy, that it should be removed. I've seen pro players, I've seen casuals, I've seen it all over the place, people hating on the card. I've seen the other side of it, and I wanted to kind of go into my take on the card, if it's good for the game, bad for the game, is this type of counterplay acceptable? But I want to kind of go, before we get into my take on it, go through a little bit of history of counterplay in Hearthstone, because Hearthstone is typically a game that has very little counterplay. So if you go back to the beginning of Hearthstone, you look at Classic, you scroll through the collection, you look for cards that can kind of counter your opponent, there is almost nothing there. It's mostly just spells, minions, and well, that's about it. You got your weapons, and there's very little ways to counteract your opponent. The main way is to play a secret. A secret was one of the early ways to try and have counterplay. Case in point being counter spell. It's a secret. When your opponent casts a spell, you counter it. So you get to play something to proactively stop your opponent from doing something later. The same could even be said for Ice Block, preventing lethal damage, becoming immune, a form of counterplay in a way, although very frustrating. And as you'll note, a lot of these cards are going to be talking about are very frustrating cards, because by their nature, counterplay cards are frustrating. They stop you from doing what you want to do in the game, and who in the hell wants that to happen? It's going to be a frustrating thing, but when you look at a card like Counterspell, I've never heard like this shouldn't exist, and we've seen it pop up in other variants, whether it be a recent edition like Oh My God, which by the way, I did want that card removed, but just because it's 1 mana and ridiculous and drive me crazy, and like Ice Trap recently for Hunter, and also provide some counterplay you don't normally see. One of the most early iconic counterplay cards in the game is Dirty Rat. This was a neutral taunt minion, so every class could run it. It was a 2/6, and it had the battle cry of your opponent summons a random minion from their hand. I remember when this was revealed, a lot of people like, this kind of garbage. It's, you know, you get a big taunt, but then you're summoning a minion that could backfire. But it became pretty apparent that, well, if you're playing this and you pull like a Yogg-Saron, you pull a Malagos and remove it, you can remove maybe your opponent's win condition. You can remove a valuable card in their hand. All of a sudden, there was kind of some counterplay on the minion variety, not just countering a spell. And this card, to this very day, because counterplay is so limited wild due to the fact the way the game works, the way Hearthstone is, you only get to act on your own turn. It's not like Magic where you can play like an instant and just stop your opponent depending on the situation, no matter whose turn it is. Hearthstone, you're relegated to your own turn for every action, and all of a sudden, Dirty Rat allows you to pull something out of your opponent's hand. It's on your turn. Any other way, it's just never going to happen. And this card, again, is still meta in the game today in Wild, because counterplay is so rare, and to this day, again, sees tons of play. Warlock is another class that's actually started getting disruption tools, like a card like Gnome Feratu, where it removes the top card of your opponent's deck. Another of counterplay and disruption, one I rarely ever heard a complaint about, and also really funny when a Lore Keeper Polk out comes down. Again, against a bit like a Raza Priest, and then you know their Anduin's next, and you ship it. But overall, another disruption card. You'll note, though, are very random in their nature. You don't really have a ton of influence over it, and your opponent, especially with like the Dirty Rat example, can try and play around it, hold minions and all of that. As the game evolved, the counterplay began to evolve. They started experimenting with more busted counterplay cards, and we have Mindrunner Lucia. This has been nerfed twice. It was originally 2 mana, and it originally you would swap hands and decks with your opponent, and you could just play their cards, throw them away like garbage, and was one of the most frustrating cards ever to face, because all of a sudden the random element of the disruption kind of went away. If they had the mana to spend to burn your cards, they could just throw away whatever they want, and it even became a pseudo like time warp, an extra turn for like aggro decks, because they would just swap your hand and they'd have no cards, and you were left with like, I can't do anything, I have nothing, and then you basically passing your turn, which led to this card changing and no longer being disruption, and as a result sees almost no play at all anymore unless you're kind of memeing in Wild. But overall, this was like the strongest disruption card ever, and Hearthstone kind of realized we can't have disruption this powerful, and they changed the card, outright killed it, and we haven't seen something like that quite since. And another hugely contested disruption card, Ticketus, 6 mana card. If you corrupted it, meaning you played a 7 card cost card or more, it corrupts it, you would remove the top 5 cards from your opponent's deck. You could double this up, you could do a lot of stuff, and all of a sudden you're disrupting your opponent by deleting their cards, effectively deleting their ability to play the game. This card, though, came at a steep cost. It was 6 mana, you had to corrupt it, and against a lot of decks, deleting cards didn't really matter if they're aggressive, and this card never changed. It was one of the most hated cards ever. Don't get me wrong, there was, I don't know if there's been a card with more Reddit threads about it than Ticketus. I think it was close to being unhealthy disruption in the game, but it never hit the power level, the popularity of, let's say, a Dirty Rat, a Lucia, that it never became so prolific that it was ever changed. And even in Wild today, it sees limited play, but is still not the most effective disruption tool. And again, does that make it healthy? I don't think so. I still think this is a card that could have been changed at some point, but overall is one of those examples of where they really found that fine line and decided we're on the right side of it, even if you disagree with it. And then we get to standard right now. Mutinous, the Devourer, recently released back in the Forged in the Barrens, I believe, the mini set. It's a Murloc that eats a minion in your opponent's hand, gain its stats. Very similar to Dirty Rat in its disruption abilities. Again, it just pulls a minion out of your opponent's hand. Rather than having to kill it, though, it's just devoured. They can't resurrect it with, like, you know, raise dead, any type of resurrect effects. It's gone, their win con's gone, and it's been a relatively healthy disruption tool, similar to Dirty Rat. The issue with it, rather expensive, so if combo pieces are relatively cheap, like we saw in United and Stormwind, this card just not very good at hitting those rewards. And that leaves us off with Theotar, one of the more powerful disruption cards we have ever seen, because unlike Dirty Rat, unlike a Mutinous, you get an option of what to pick from your opponent's hand, and it does come at a price. You do have to give up a card, but that's pretty inconsequential most of the time. But you get that power of picking. It could be a spell, it can be a hero card, it can be a quest reward, it can be whatever is in their hand. However, it falls under Discover rules, so your opponent can attempt to play around it by holding more than 3 cards, trying to mitigate the chance of those cards appearing in their hand. And if you've all forgotten, we're not far removed from a combo meta such as United and Stormwind, where quest lines or an Il'gynoth were introduced, and there was very limited, almost no counterplay in the game other than a Mindrunner Lucia, which again was perceived to be unhealthy and toxic for the game and was changed. And a card like Theotar back then at 4 mana would have been an absolute godsend to try and compete with those hyper aggressive combo strategies where you could play a Theotar, maybe steal that combo piece, steal that Il'gynoth, steal a burn card, maybe steal a pivotal card to your quest completion. I feel like this card would be held in a healthier regard right now if combos were actually more prevalent. But as it stands right now, it's hitting your Denathrius, it's hitting your hero card, and that's basically about it for the most part. And as a result, it's very frustrating. A counterplay card will always be very frustrating to face. I put out this tweet and it got over like 400 likes and a ton of responses. I'll summarize how I feel about Theotar. I feel like it's the combination of the healthy style of counterplay we've seen in Dirty Rat, we've seen in Mutinous, where it's not guaranteed the opponent can play around to an extent. There is a sacrifice by playing a card, there is decision making in there, but ultimately it allows you to play a card in your deck that allows you to disrupt these strategies that have become so powerful in today's game, where it's nearly impossible to try and counteract stuff through simple minion interactions on the board. And by introducing a card like Theotar, you're able to actually have some direct counterplay in the game, steal that Shudderwalk in Wild, steal that Denathrius, hugely infused in Standard, and have a chance of winning the game without having to get frustrated and have to play a super hard counter to a deck. You can just tech in a Theotar, try and steal that key card. So for me, Theotar is a frustrating card when it beats you. It's a pretty exhilarating card when you win, but overall, I feel like it's a necessary evil to the game, where again, it has evolved to such a high power level game where there's just got to be some way of counteracting what your opponent's doing. So let me know in the comments how you feel about a card like Theotar. Is it good for the game? Bad for the game? Would you see it change? I'd love to hear it. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Have a great day and stay salty, my friends.